It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here, and it is time to preview the Divisional Round playoffs featuring your Washington Commanders and the Detroit Lions. Two teams that mirror each other in so many ways. It's going to be a lot of fun to break this one down, Logan. We had a great crossover episode with our Detroit podcast, but it's time to dive into what you saw on film. And I will acknowledge for those watching on YouTube, yes, I'm in a very different place. It's really a podcasting cliche today for me, Logan. I'm podcasting from my parents' house.
Yeah, but it looks good though. You got like some trophies and stuff over there in the background, which is nice.
I'm like,
what, on the other side,
where we got? We got some stuff that my dad won. We got some like toys from my childhood. My that back there, that's the cover of the book that my dad wrote. The Reality of BS, Big Sales. That is there. Free shout out for Dad's book on the podcast. That's not what people came for. They came for football analysis, and that's what we are going to give you. All right, let's dive in, Logan. And to me, the first thing that sticks out about this game is the similarities between the two teams. And it's hilarious that their head coaches share a first name because their head coaches share quite a bit. There is just a mentality about the way both of these teams were built. There's a lot of crossover in terms of similarity. There's even some crossover in the front offices. Lance Newmark, Ben Sosna coming from Detroit to join Adam Peters' staff in D.C. The physicality and kind of how these teams play, there's just so much there. What sticks out to you in terms of the biggest of pictures here and how Detroit has gone from a sad sack franchise that is now a 15-win team and the number one seed to a Washington franchise that was a sad sack franchise, flipped ownership, got all these new people in, and is now a 12, counting the playoffs, 13-win team entering this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard not to think like 3 years back on the Detroit Lions, and what they've done from an offseason kind of team building perspective. And I think they've just like knocked it out of the park. And you see a lot of those kind of early footprints with Adam Peters coming here. You mentioned the similarities in personnel or like the crossover personnel, the people that have come from Detroit. And I think you see quite a bit of that, right? You kind of get this tough compete emphasis in the building, right? You draft guys that are tough, competitive. You draft guys that you have a very clear vision for. Like I think about the Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell draft for them and how that was much maligned, but they had a really strong vision for those players. And again, I think there's a lot of that going on. And to me, it's just like right now, San Francisco maybe are like the best franchises to me in terms of like how you build your team, right? You build it through the draft. You got to hit on people. You got to kind of have visions for personnel, and then kind of the accents that you put on it with free agency additions. Like I think about Zeitler coming in, he's their right guard, like what he's done for them, when their last guard departed in free agency, like all those little moves are really big. And then I do think so that's a personnel element, right? And then I think there's kind of this data-driven approach to how they play offense, right? Which is like hyper aggressive. We're going to go for it on fourth down. We're going to possess the football. And I think you see the power and impact of that because now all the top teams do that. Think about the Buffalo Bills, the Philadelphia Eagles, the LA Rams. They all kind of embrace this, be more aggressive on fourth down. They're going to trust the analytics. They're going to trust the math. They're going to cultivate offensive performances that reflect that. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff. It was really funny too, I think also when I was watching Joe Witt Jr.'s defense, the first probably 50 plays, I was like, man, there's a lot of similarities here just in terms of philosophy, like just in terms of what they want to be in terms of first and second down, just basic structure, the coverages they want to get to, the amount of man they want to play, right? So there's a lot of like crossover. Offensively, I think there's a lot of difference when you look at personnel, formation, how they get to certain stuff. But in terms of like the DNA and the identity of it, it's actually more similar philosophically than you'd probably think. So I do think there are a lot of similarities to these two teams. I think they're at different kind of, periods of the gestation of the franchise, in terms of growing and developing. But I think, again, it is a fun matchup. The more you dig into it, the more you see the similarities.
You mentioned the fourth down thing, and I was just scrolling through some of these next-gen insights before the show, and this one is just absolutely mind-blowing. The Lions at plus 119.9% and the Commanders at plus 103.5% were the only two teams in the NFL to gain over a full game's worth of win probability added as a result of going for it on fourth down this season. Overall, the Commanders converted on 20 of 23 fourth downs this season, the highest conversion rate with any offense with at least 15 fourth down attempts since at least 1991. The Lions converted 2/3 of their fourth down attempts this season at 22 of 33. And I think a lot of people look at the fourth down stuff and they talk about, oh, this is a mentality. They're tough. They're aggressive. They're going to go for it. And there definitely is an element of that. And it's why I was really happy that as the season went on, Dan Quinn kind of leaned into that even more. He's like, I have Jayden Daniels, an ultimate fourth down weapon. We're the best fourth down team in over 25 years of the NFL. Like, we're going to go for it more often. But it's also leaning into the strategy and the analytics of it. And I think Campbell probably does go for it at times when the analytics would even say kick. But overall, like, these two guys that are like old school in so many ways embrace this new school way of thinking because they understand that it actually helps you win football games. And I think the second part of that is they understand who they are. They kind of understand their own analytics. And, Campbell had this kind of now famous fourth down a couple weeks ago. I think it was against Green Bay where they're tied with like 40 seconds to go. And even the aggressive analytics models were like, kick it. You go up 3 with 40 seconds to go and trust your defense. And he's like, nah, my defense is mega banged up. Like we're an offensive football team. We're going to go win the game with our offense. They get the fourth down. They run down more clock. They kick the game-winning field goal as time expires, win the football game. And I think Quinn has done that as well. So I think there's not just a strong sense of identity in terms of they set out to be fast, physical, all those things, but they have a sense of who they are and then what that means for how they deploy their talent, the game strategy and game management decisions they make. And I think a lot of that stuff could very well come into play in this game.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think understanding who you are and understanding who your playmakers are is a big piece of that, right? And so I think it's interesting when they do go for it on fourth down. A lot of teams kind of get back in the gun or whatever. Fourth and 3, they'll get back in the gun and they'll kind of, like let the quarterback deal it out. But Detroit will run the ball. Like they'll get in heavy personnel, almost like goal line personnel, and run power. And like picking up 3 on power, that is an identity of that team, right? Those guys buy into it. It's a cultural thing, right? And then I think here you say, hey, what do we do on fourth down? We kind of say Jayden Daniels with the quarterback run, with some of these quick passes. Like we kind of speak to what they do, but I do think it also is kind of a magnifying glass on who they think they are and who we think we are right now. And again, that's going to change a lot over the next couple of years for the Commanders. But I do think it's telling that when it's fourth and 3, it's like, let's call power. It's like, who in their right mind would do that? Nobody does that. But they've built that physical toughness, that idea that we can run on anybody. Like that's part of the DNA. And I think it shows up in those critical moments for sure.
They had over 1,800 yards on design runs from scrimmage this year, which is over 400 yards more than any other team, which is
under center. You said too, right? I like that was the other thing.
Double check that one. I think it's just let's see. Oh yeah, from under center runs this season. So 1,801 yards, over 400 more than the next closest offense.
And it's crazy watching that because it reminds me so much of like what Kyle Shanahan's offense used to be like in 2000, like when he was in Atlanta, like under center, heavy play action, like the first and second down offense of this team feels like a Kyle Shanahan offense, like that under center ability, and now everyone's in the gun, everyone's in the pistol, everyone's kind of got some different stuff going on, but this feels so traditional. This kind of feels like a classic like zig when everyone's zagging, right? Instead of going to spreading people out, we're going to kind of pack it in. Reminds me of kind of like Jim Harbaugh when he came to Stanford or Jim Harbaugh when he went to Michigan. Like we're going to run the ball more out of these more traditional sets, and those traditional sets do present issues for defenses that people seem to forget about as we get farther away from that being kind of the staple of the NFL. But I do think I think that's really telling. I think that's one of the best stats that we've been able to find is that under center runs, and they're so efficient at them. And it's it's a really fun offense to watch because of that. It kind of combines this traditional element with the trick plays and all this kind of stuff. So it is a cool offense, but I think that's like the thing that makes them go. It's under center, runs, and then everything kind of builds off of that.
Right, and if you want to maximize Jared Goff and under center off of play action, a dude who can touch every area of the field, like if you want to run a hard, heavy play action to the right and then throw to a guy back deep left on a tight end leak or something on a post to the left, like you can do that because Jared Goff's arm is ridiculous. He's got a cannon and he's got a quick release, and he has no fear. And part of that no fear is how Dan Campbell has treated him. And there's a great piece in The Athletic this week on Campbell. Highly recommend that. There's a really fun piece actually on ESPN.com on Dan Skipper, their 6'9", sixth offensive lineman who's become a little bit of a cult hero in Detroit that I read this morning as well. So. Detroit is an easy team to root for. I think if it's not this week, they're a lot of fun. The way they built it, they have some great personalities. And obviously the shared misery of being really bad for a long time. I think a lot of people are happy for what Dan Campbell has done with the Lions. But for Washington this week, it's all business, and to see if they can take it down. Any other big picture things we want to hit on before we dive into the details here?
No, I think that's kind of the high level stuff. And again, I think we can kind of start pointing out the differences between offenses and defenses and philosophies. But again, high level, I'm really excited about the high level comparisons because I do think Detroit is the model, right? Establish a strong culture, establish an identity on the offensive defensive side of the football. San Francisco did it 3 years before them. And I just think that's the model. Good identity, good pieces, build through the draft, accent with free agency. And so I'm excited, again, to see if Washington can get to this point that Detroit's at now.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's the thing. Detroit has absolutely crushed their drafts. And we'll talk about a bunch of these players as we go here by nature. But, I mean, if they can do what Brad Holmes has done, this Washington team, it's scary because Detroit's first year with Campbell and Holmes, they were 3-13. Washington's first year, they're 12-5 in the regular season and have notched a playoff win. So what can they grow into? Going to be a whole lot of fun to watch, but that's for later. Now, let's talk Saturday. Let's start off by talking about a very interesting Detroit defense, Logan, led by Aaron Glenn, who very well might be a head coach a month from now for some other team. Former defensive back in the league with the Jets and the Patriots, came up on Sean Payton's staff in New Orleans, where he was there under Dennis Allen as well, the recently fired Saints coach, who's going to be a defensive coordinator again and is very, very good at that job. But Campbell down there in New Orleans as well, brought him up to Detroit. And I think the thing everybody knows about Detroit's defense is they're really banged up. At points this year, down more than half of their defensive starters. What I don't know if people fully realize is they didn't actually fall off that much. There are certain elements, like their pass rush certainly took a huge hit when Aiden Hutchinson went out. He actually is still their team leader in sacks despite missing well over half the season. But this defense is really good, and they've played some of their best ball of late, Logan. What do you see when you watch them? What stands out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun group to watch, and I think it's fun because it is diverse. And what I mean by that is even on the first and second down cut up, usually that's kind of the easiest thing to kind of find a common thread, right? They kind of bounce in between multiple fronts. They get in a 4-down front. They get in a 3-down front. Some people say 5-2, however you want to categorize that. But they kind of do it with their, 4-down front personnel. So you'll get like a stand-up will linebacker, kind of like Frankie Louvu, in with the Commanders. He'll be the stand-up defensive end. So there's a little bit of that. And then they have this really cool kind of, they play a little bit more man than most teams, but then they'll rotate out and get into cover 3, but they also get out into cover 2, and you're like, oh, this time they're in quarters. And they're really good about kind of presenting different looks and maintaining continuity, if that makes sense, maintaining a consistency with the rules, and there's not busts, and so they can get to a bunch of different stuff. And it makes sense. He's been the defensive coordinator there for 3 years, so they should be able to do a lot of stuff. But it shows up quite a bit. And then on third down, you see just a very diverse pressure package. It's not like Todd Bowles where you're like, oh my God, this is, like the craziest thing I've ever seen. It's, kind of stuff that the Commanders run. We got 2 stand-up guys in the A-gap. We're going to run some type of, Zimmer pressures where there's like a nickel. We're going to bring 4-man overloads. We're going to stress you that way. But we have different stuff we can do. And so I think the pressure rate numbers are very, very high. But I think that's partially because they do play some of that kind of 3-down, 5-man front on first and second down. So every time you run the football, it registers as a blitz. But, third and medium, red zone, like as you're getting into that fringe red zone area, like that field goal range, they'll bring a little bit of pressure. It's kind of on script in terms of when they do it. But they do it well. And it's that coupled with the flexibility and diversity they bring in the back end, kind of, they play a lot of man. That's what they're going to do. Like that's like when the chips are down, they're going to play man. But they do have these other changeups, and you see them affect quarterbacks. Like there's a couple with Josh Allen in the Buffalo game where they play a different coverage than they were expecting. He reads the wrong side. He's expecting cover one. It's actually cover two. There's a flat player, and Josh Allen can scramble off, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But that flexibility is pretty devastating. And like usually if I watch 50 clips of a defense, I got a good feel for what they're doing. I can kind of identify certain coverages pre-snap, right? This one, not really. And that was something I was like, this is probably where their advantage lies from a technical standpoint, is that they do have this ability to kind of, even with man zone indicators, it was really interesting. They'd bring a guy across the formation, the guy's running with him like it's man, and then the ball snapped, and then they all bail out to cover two, and you're like, dang, like that was a really good disguise. So lots of stuff like that. So flexibility, I think, is the number one thing that keeps them dangerous.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, too, that Glenn has been here for a couple years, and it's something we should talk about when we get to their offense as well. Part of the reason that Detroit's really special as a team is they have done something you're not supposed to be able to do, which is have this level of continuity. Ben Johnson was supposed to be a head coach 2 years ago, and then when he wasn't 2 years ago, he was definitely supposed to be last year, and we don't need to relitigate that whole situation, especially as it's in regards to Washington. But the point is, like, it is rare that you get here, and you've talked about this so much, especially in the offseason, some of the install periods and things like that, that it takes, say, 3 years to learn an offense. How often do you actually get 3 years? Unless you are Kyle in San Francisco or Sean in LA, where the head coach is the offensive coordinator. Or if you're, I even look at like Raheem Morris just fired his defensive coordinator in Atlanta, and it's like, you're a defensive head coach. You just fired your defensive coordinator in year one, and you weren't taking that on. And that's why I like, since Dan decided he wasn't going to call the plays, like he hired one of his guys, so there could be that continuity. But year over year, scheme evolution is a huge advantage, and it's not just in what you can kind of build of, like, hey, we can add more stuff. It's your base stuff, or the stuff that you have been running. You know it so well that you can disguise it better. You can do all these different things. And I think that's a huge element, that's a huge like benefit for Detroit structurally. But the fact that they can do it when they have guys they brought in off the street, I hate that term, but off the street in the middle of the season and still do this, I think that just speaks to how well Aaron Glenn teaches this defense and the rest of that staff teaches this defense, because they haven't really missed a beat despite the fact that they've had all of these injuries. They're still doing that next level stuff.
Yeah, and I do think it's helpful when you have, again, like the cultural element is so important, and Dan talks about that here, with some of the injuries that the Commanders have negotiated. It's like you're preparing everyone like they're going to play. And that's a rare, I know that sounds like, like everyone should be doing that. Not everyone does that, right? You're getting your starters ready to go. And so making sure you have some type of developmental like pathway for those backups, the guys you bring in who could be playing in a week or two, like that's really important. And I think you see elements of that for sure, because, they've had a lot of injuries, but there doesn't seem to be, like, there's not like a discipline issue. You're not like, oh, this guy's new, so he's not going to run the blitz right. It's like, oh, they runs it perfectly, or they're going to run this disguise, and this guy knows exactly what to do. And they do communicate a lot. They do kind of do a lot of the kind of fundamental things of defense. But I do think that's a huge element, is they do seem to have a very, at least watching the film, a very consistent way of coaching that allows all these players to get ready. And I think that's a testament to Aaron Glenn. And, Dan Campbell said this in a presser the other day when they were talking about Aaron Glenn getting a head coaching opportunity. He's like, he teaches it better than anybody I've been around. And as a coach, like a guy that I've been around a lot of coaches, I've coached a little bit, obviously outside of my football career, obviously. That is the biggest compliment you can get, honestly, as a coach, because you ultimately are a teacher. And if you can teach and make the material engaging and get the guys to buy in, like you're awesome. And so I think that definitely shows up in his work, in the work that he puts out every single week.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the communication element is going to be huge on Saturday night, because that stadium is going to be raucous. And I'm curious about this too, Logan. We talk about the Commanders' no huddle sometimes, but I just kind of had a different appreciation for it. Something clicked for me for whatever reason in that game against Tampa of just how challenging it can be for a defense when you do have guys running in and out because the Commanders do sub. They don't necessarily go hurry up, but the lack of huddle means defensively you can't huddle either. You still have a sudden huddle up. They probably have some kind of hurry up, like let's get on the ball and let's go, while they're all standing there in the middle of the field trying to figure out what's going on. And then especially in a place like Detroit where it's so loud when you're on defense. Like that's great. You want that energy. But the Commanders are kind of used to dealing with hand signals and playing whisper down the lane and making sure their communication's are really good. And for Detroit, they're used to it on some level as well. They've been the defense that's playing at Ford Field when the defense or the crowd is really loud all season. But now without a huddle, with having to maybe do this a little bit more on the fly, do you think that's something that the Commanders can take advantage of? I would say even more strongly, yes, before Alex Anzalone came back. He's a huge element for what they do as the green dot, and he was back in Week 18 and will be playing in this game. But how do you think that, I don't want to call it underrated, but kind of subtle thing might wind up playing into this game?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, and it's something that I appreciate too, but probably for a different reason. Obviously, the getting lined up and getting things communicated is a huge element of that, but also what I've found when you go no huddle, we had game plans when I was playing. I'm trying to remember, probably everywhere I was actually, where we would encourage no huddle or some type of 2-minute on third down specifically because the crowd didn't know when to cheer. So you kind of get this, like, you get like a cheer because, like if you think about it, if I'm coming out of the huddle, that's when the crowd will start cheering. And when you watch the Tampa Bay game or something like that, the crowd's loud, but they're not cheering. They're not screaming. And like the guys that are screaming the whole time, it kind of dips like right when you're about to snap the ball. So I think that's one element of advantage. Obviously, I didn't really think about this until you mentioned it, but they have this rule where they have 12 men in the huddle. That's a penalty, obviously, right? But when you're not in a huddle, you can bring as many people on and off the field as you want. So I do think that and such a big part of defensive football is making sure you match the personnel because you have tendencies with certain personnel on the field. So it's like, it's 12 personnel, and then the coach is signaling 12 from the sideline as he's making the call to the linebacker. But which 12 is it? Is it 1286? Is it 1282? Is it 12? Like, is there another version of 1273?
And by the way,
maybe?
As someone who charts personnel, like teams treat Ben Sinnott and Zach Ertz 12 personnel very, very differently. Like typically they will match the 12 personnel with Ertz and nickel, and typically they'll match Sinnott and base. But Detroit plays the highest level of base defense in the league, so there's a chance that changes on Saturday.
Yeah, so again, then you're like, oh my gosh, getting this communication worked out in terms of 12 personnel. Then it's nickel on the field. Then it's like, I really want to run a fire zone blitz. Now as the middle linebacker, they're lined up. They're already ready. And I have to get that communicated. That seems like a big lift. And so I do think it does simplify what they can do and what they can feel comfortable doing. But I also think it's, if they're not going fast. So you just take your time, get it communicated if you're Detroit. But it does kind of present some issues. And again, the communication on Washington's side is going to be also hard to deal with as well because you got to get it communicated. It's going to be loud. But I do think that it is a subtle advantage in multiple ways for an offense because it helps you navigate the noise. It helps you kind of get them in a little bit of a bind. So I do think there is something to that for sure.
Speaking of double-edged swords, the amount of man coverage that the Detroit Lions play is the highest rate in the NFL. And there's part of me that's like, sick. They're going to play man coverage against Jayden Daniels. He's going to run all over the place. You're going to play man coverage against Terry McLaurin like that. There's also the rest of the receivers who I don't necessarily trust as much against man coverage, although Diami's been pretty solid this season. If you look at like his PFF grade versus man, it's still in the green. Love that. But, guys like Olamide Zaccheaus, probably a little bit more effective against zone. And obviously, Detroit's good at it. It also helps them out on the run defense. They can be really aggressive downhill, especially their linebackers love to just come up and fill quickly because if you're in man-to-man on the running back, whether he has the ball or not, like you're just getting to the guy that you're covering. So, things like play action fakes, you're kind of covered on the back end. And you see that pop up on tapes from time to time where there's not these big holes in zone coverage because they're not playing zone coverage. And so how do you feel like that element of what Detroit does on the back end plays out this weekend? If you're them, do you continue to roll the way you have been rolling? Probably because the identity piece, but do you have to at least think about it because of Jayden's legs being one of the most unique weapons in the sport?
Right. So let's put some context on that. So they do pressure a lot and they do play base defense a lot, but if they're in their 5-man, they're 3-4 front, right? that's going to play like a pressure every time you run the football. They're going to fit it, and they're going to chart it like it's a blitz, right? So that's going to spike that percentage a little bit, right? When you watch the Buffalo Bills game, and Buffalo is like really spread out, right? They run an offense in terms of like pre-snap structures that's very similar to the Washington Commanders, which is one of the reasons I like to check them out. They spread out with you, and they don't want to blitz as much. They don't like the space, right? If it's condensed, if it's tight, they're going to be a little bit more aggressive kind of coming downhill. But they pressured Josh Allen, I think it was like 34%, which is like way off of their season total. If you look at Caleb Williams, they pressured him a little bit less. Obviously, the stationary quarterbacks, the guys that don't scramble a lot, Jordan Love, they pressured a lot. Sam Darnold, they pressured a lot. And So based on that kind of history, I don't expect them to pressure a lot. However, if I'm Detroit, I would still pressure a lot, because I think when you look at the things that the Commanders have a hard time with, it's pressure. It's unblocked pressure. And when you look at Tampa Bay, I think is a great example. Look at week 1. Look at how much consternation they were able to put the offense in. And again, Jayden Daniels is a rookie, all that kind of stuff. But they spied him a lot. They played more zone. They played softer coverages, and Jayden's able to sit in the pocket and pick you apart. Look at the Arizona game. They kind of pulled way back off their kind of preseason, or the 4 games before that, blitz percentage, and Jayden Daniels picked them apart. The teams that kind of say, hey, if you can beat us in man coverage and beat us while we're bringing pressure, good for you, like Pittsburgh Steelers, right? They were a great example of that. Even the Cleveland Browns to a certain extent. Again, remember the first couple drives of that game are really tough for the Commanders to get going. So they had, again, the recent history shows that they'll play more zone to scrambling quarterbacks. But I also think maybe their best bet is to stay aggressive and just be like, hey, we're going to get you on enough of these percentage-wise that it's going to tip the scale in our favor. We're going to get got, but we're going to get you too.
So the Lions blitz percentage this year, the 5 highest games, they blitzed the absolute hell out of Jordan Love in week 14. That was a 62.5%.
And also, that's the other thing, sorry to cut you off, is they blitzed a lot on first and second down too, because they wanted to run the ball. So there was a lot of run blitzes. There's a lot of third down blitzes. Like that was a huge part of what they thought would be effective, right? And one of the things they do, which I love, is they'll blitz formation. So like, let's say you're in a tight formation, you bring the receiver across like in a jet motion. Usually you're running either away from the motion, so they'll blitz somebody right there, right? So they do have some of these checks that on first and second down that are very effective in terms of kind of creating consternation for an offense, but on first and second down.
Yeah. By the way, these are blitz percentages against the pass. So, we're not even talking about run blitzes here. But that was just
something I thought about while we were talking.
For sure. No, it's great context. So, like, they're actually blitzing probably on a higher percentage than the numbers I'm giving overall. But on passing downs, 62.5% against Green Bay in week 14. 53 against Minnesota in week 18. They played Mac Jones and the Jags in week 11. That was a 51%. And then Sam Darnold again on week 7, 51%. Their lowest numbers of the season, hilariously, their third lowest was against Detroit or against Green Bay in week 9. So they didn't blitz him the first time, and then we're like, never mind, we're going to flip that script. But their lowest was Matthew Stafford in week 1. They only blitzed 19%. I guess they just were figuring that Stafford is experienced enough to pick you apart, and the one-on-one matchups you have with Kupp and Puka. But week 3, they played Arizona, and they only blitzed 21% of the time. It was probably the best running quarterback they played all year in Kyler Murray. So I think that probably is instructive on some level. And I think the other like dynamic moving target that you're trying to figure out if you're Aaron Glenn is Jayden Daniels has been exceptional against zone coverage this year, as you were just talking about. His completion percentage is well above 70%. It's one of the best in the league. Has not turned the ball over. Maybe he has like one time, but like very rarely turns the ball over. Versus man, way more boom or bust. Lower completion percentage, more touchdowns, but also a lot more interceptions. So how much fire do you want to play with? And I think the last element of the fire here is when you play man coverage, you are more susceptible to the quarterback run. Mm-hmm. And if your eyes are turned against Jayden Daniels, he can get out. And that is what I would be concerned about, and why I would probably lean towards playing a little bit more zone, like you said, but at the same, opposite, but at the same time, now I'm just talking in circles, but like this is the gamesmanship that's happening, right? What does Washington want to do? Control the ball.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to play ball control offense, fine, play zone against us. We'll go on 12-play drives all day long and burn 8 minutes a clock. And so I guess I probably ultimately land, if I'm Glenn, on let's be who we are. Let's make them hurry it up, because the more possessions that are in this game, the better we feel about winning it. And that's probably the game I would play, knowing that at times I'm going to get got.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those things where you kind of talk through it a little bit, and you're like, oh, actually, this initial solution is the best one. Because, again,
it's almost like if you keep talking with two playoff teams that you realize are really, really good, you're going to run into problems at every turn.
Right, and I think like that's the thing, though, is like they seem to have, you talk about their identity. Their identity for scrambling quarterbacks is to not blitz as much. But like if you watch the game versus Josh Allen, like and again, this is interesting. I feel very comfortable playing zone coverage versus Kyler Murray because he doesn't see it super well, right? Like he is looking kind of big play hunting, right? Josh Allen, you play zone coverage, you put yourself in a huge bind because he can run around, he can extend plays, he can pick you apart. And I think if I'm Aaron Glenn, and again, I don't know him at all, but I would learn from that decision, be like, hey, we need to be maybe not this passive. We need to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of bringing pressure because, again, like Jayden Daniels will hurt you, but if we can get you to 2nd and 15 on a first down run or on a first down pass, bat a ball down, like 2nd and 10, whatever, just increase the level of variance for the offense. That plays to our favor because what does variance bring to an offense? It does bring explosive plays, but also leads to punts. And if we're an offensive-driven football team, I want our offense to have the football as much as possible. And there are games where you watch it, like I go back to the Bills game, for example, where they're trying to mitigate the explosive play. They're trying to keep a top on everything. And that's just really not who they are. You know what I mean? You can tell it's a little uncomfortable for them defensively. So I quite frankly would expect them to blitz, be a little bit more aggressive than they were in that game. Probably not, Jordan Love, Sam Darnold levels of aggression. And again, some of that's because of the formation. You mentioned it's versus passes. What do those teams like to do on first down? They like to play action a lot, right? So you're going to see on those early downs, it's going to kind of catch some of those run blitzes a little bit more in that bucket. So again, back to the original point. I'd bring a little bit more pressure, be a little bit more aggressive if I was them. And if I'm Cliff, I'm making sure I have answers for that, right? I'm making sure Jayden feels good for both, right? If they're going to play this kind of weird 2 rotation or cover 3 rotation, like where are my answers? What are my solutions? If we're hot, where are my answers? What are my solutions? And we did the game plan taping with Dan Quinn, which airs on, I think, Friday this week because of the playoff game. And he was saying, Jayden's getting to a point now where he can handle protections. So like that's great coaching by Cliff to say, hey, we're getting a little bit of heat. I think this is the look we want. Let me slide the protection, hit this ball over the top to Terry. Like that, again, he's maturing as a player. But the thing that this comes down to, if I'm Cliff matching this, is just, hey, this is our offense. This is what we do. They could do all these different things, but if we have answers versus like from our day one install stuff that we feel very comfortable with, we don't need to worry because you've shown an ability to handle all this stuff. And so that's where it's I think it's Cliff. Like you just kind of say, oh, do I need to put something in for this blitz or for this run or for this? No, we got a guy who can handle it and we got an offensive line that can handle it. Let's give him the keys and let him run with it.
Among all rookie quarterback seasons since 2016, Jayden Daniels ranks first in completions, passing yards, touchdowns, completion percentage, and passer rating against the blitz. So they've done a really good job of that this year. Daniels generated a total of plus 50.3 EPA against the blitz, more than double any other rookie quarterback since 2016. So historically great against it. And he was blitzed on 32.7% of his dropbacks this season, 6th highest in the NFL. However, this is strength on strength because the Lions blitzed at the 2nd highest rate in the NFL after losing Aiden Hutchinson in Week 7. Over that time, they allowed the 2nd lowest passer rating, 5th lowest success rate while blitzing. Opposing offenses lost minus 51 EPA against the Lions blitzes in Weeks 7 through 18, more than twice as much as the next closest defense. So this is a major strength on strength. However,
I just want to say this before we keep going.
Yeah.
Like there's got to be a little bit of context on there too. They're also, the teams that they're playing are in way more obvious passing situations, right? Because game flow, usually when they play the Detroit Lions, is that the Detroit Lions are up. So you're going to throw the ball more. And I can be more aggressive because I know what you're doing. So this is, again, where we come back to the I don't even know if we said this at the top of the show, but like you have to control the game script here as much as possible if you're the Commanders offense. You have to stay in the race because it keeps them from doing some of this more aggressive stuff and kind of teeing off on you in a way where they're like, oh, they're going to pass, they're going to pass, they're going to pass. We're going to bring all of our kind of different pressures and put this offensive line in consternation. So that's going to be a huge element, I think, also.
Yeah, the Lions faced the 5th most passes this season. They faced the least amount of run plays this season. 369. By the way, the most was Carolina. Carolina faced almost 600 runs this season. That's
a lot of runs.
Hilarious. So all that stuff said, there's another element to this matchup that we haven't really gotten into yet that I think is also going to be really interesting, which is the run game. Obviously, Washington's run game struggled tremendously against Tampa. We've talked about this quite a bit. Unlike a lot of the previous games where they've struggled with the running back run game, the quarterback run game never got going either. One of the games that I queued up to watch was the Indy game because of Anthony Richardson. And I was like, well, how did they do running the football? Jonathan Taylor did not have a good day that day. And you also see, by the way, later as some of those games go on, some of these games I watch, I was like, well, now seeing how they're reacting to run, let me watch some of the play action stuff. And you're on like your 4th play action pass of the game. You look up at the score bug and it's 23-7, and you're like, of course they're not biting on play action anymore. So that script part becomes really, really important as well. But Anthony Richardson had some pretty big pops in that game, and they were not all read option. Like there were some that were just straight up quarterback run, and they used some of the counter actions to say like, hey, we're going to fake a pitch to the right and then just have Anthony Richardson run left. Linebackers are flying towards the running back. They take themselves out of the play, and next thing you know, Anthony Richardson's got 18 yards. I know you watch some of the Buffalo tape, and they'll run Josh by design too. How do you think that the design run element and then whatever scramble element plays into this also affects this game on when Washington's offense is on the field?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if speaking from a quarterback standpoint first, I think where I find Jayden Daniels to be most effective is in like drop back situations, right? Like where he's in the pocket, he's making a decision to scramble. I think that's where he's most effective because he's such a devastating passer, and if the pass isn't there, there's a run lane. He can be really effective. And obviously there are situations, especially now that we're in like playoff football time, where I would feel more comfortable running him, like the draw last week versus Tampa Bay. I thought was a great decision, so, stuff like that. And I think just finding, 3-4 plays here important. But for us, Anthony Richardson does a great job with the design quarterback run game. But I think I kind of bucket Jayden Daniels in the same bucket as like Josh Allen, where you don't want to restrict him by calling a run for him. You want to say, hey, here's the space we're creating with the pass concept. If you like it, deal it. And I feel like Jayden Daniels kind of operates in a similar way, or at least the last couple of weeks has been operating in a similar way. So that's how I would kind of, this week I'd be like, hey man, remember if this isn't here, like if they give you this weird cover 2 look and we got this play called, you can always run. You know what I mean? And just kind of keep that at the forefront of his mind. And he's done a great job with that the entire season. He's leading the team in rushing for a reason. However, I do also think that this week feels like, after watching the Buffalo game and watching elements of the Green Bay game and some of the Minnesota game, this is a great opportunity, I feel, to get our running game back on track. Because I will say Aaron Glenn is very conscious of keeping good numbers over receivers. And what I mean by that is like you got 3 receivers over here. We're going to be 3 over 3, but we're going to apex maybe with a linebacker, right? So the box is actually a 5-man box, right? And so we have hats. We have enough hats to block everybody in the box. And when you think about the best rushing performances from this season, the New York Giants, for example, the Tennessee Titans, those big, huge, vaunted performances where the running backs really were very productive, it's because they were getting looks like that. So if I'm him, I'm going to be like, if I'm Cliff, I'm going to spread everything out. I'm going to maybe get in some 10, some 11 personnel, 12, but I'm going to remove people from the box and be like, match this. And if you don't, I'm going to throw a little bubble screen. And we're going to live that way. And I do think that is going to be very effective just based on the defensive structures that they've shown versus teams that play similar offensive structures to the Commanders. So it gives me a lot of confidence they'll be able to stay on schedule running the football. And again, I'm not like super worried about Jayden Daniels running the ball a ton as a design runner, but I think those two things together will lead to an opportunity for the Commanders to continue to possess the football and have an effectiveness running the ball. So.
Last thing I'll ask then, because Cliff was asked about the deep shot to Terry early. on Wednesday when he spoke, and he was basically like, yeah, early deep shots are cool. Getting the ball to Terry is better. It doesn't matter how. We've got to get 17 involved early. So when you said they're really good about keeping numbers over certain receivers, is that worrisome at all? And how do you make sure that Terry's getting his touches? Because he is, in many ways, I don't know, like Jayden's got to be the engine to make the thing go, but pick your next most important car part, and Terry's absolutely that.
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't really thought about it because, again, when you talked about this on the preview show that you did with the guy from Detroit, and you just talked about at the top of this show, like, people that can beat man-to-man coverage, the list for the Commanders is relatively tight. When you look at the Lions, they've got a bunch of people that can beat man coverage that you love the matchups with, and we'll talk about those guys more in a second. But I do think there are ways, and one of the ways that I saw that I think Green Bay did a great job of, I don't know if Terry would get this lack of attention, but like when Cliff does such a great job of getting these 4x1 sets and really forcing the defense to be like, shoot, we have to augment our coverage structure to accommodate this, and you get a really nice one-on-one on the backside. And they did it Green Bay did it, and it was like a 3rd and 2, and they basically hit a deep shot to Watson on the perimeter, and Watson just ran by the defender because, again, they're banged up on defense. They're banged up with defensive back. The defensive line's banged up. They can't create pressure with 4, and it was an explosive play. But I also think you can throw a hitch. You can throw a slant. You can do stuff that is a little bit more low risk to ensure Terry gets the ball. I think the other thing, too, is the screen game has always been really good to Terry, but I love for Terry specifically, I think he's an okay screen runner, but I love the RPO slant. I love the deep shot. I love the isolation 101 basketball. Those are things I would kind of look at first. And I think they really are good for the offense, especially we're in like a 4x1 set. Like Cliff loves to throw a screen over here. Why don't we call a screen with an isolation and then maybe a draw opportunity, right? Like we can do some stuff to give ourselves answers here. And so that's kind of the way I would lean. But again, Watson is a good player for Green Bay, but he's not Terry McLaurin. So maybe they don't do that. Maybe they keep the structure the same. And if they do that and they're going to play kind of 2 shell and do some different stuff, let's run the football.
Now you got
and
4 on the other side.
Right.
All right. That's the offense. Commanders are going to have to really run the game through that unit if they're going to win, because the side of the ball we're about to talk about is perhaps the biggest challenge in the NFL in 2024-25. Take Command Podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. And the Detroit Lions offense is where we focus our attention now. And oh man, is there a lot to talk about. This is the team that led the NFL in scoring this year, nearly 33 points per game. Joe Witt saying on Wednesday, they really do a good job of testing your discipline, Logan. What do you think that Joe means by that as you watch the tape and just go, wow, this is really good? Yeah,
and I think that's a good way to characterize it, and that's why he's a defensive coordinator in the NFL. It's like they just have a lot of ways that they can hurt you really badly. Like sometimes when you watch an offense, you're like, if you take this away, they can't really do this, and we feel good about this matchup for us. But here you're like, man, if we stop the run, they're really good at play action pass. If we kind of play softer coverages, Jared Goff's good enough to kind of beat us in zone, right? If we play man, they've got enough speed on the outside they can beat us. They got mismatched weapons on the interior with Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs, and you're kind of like, dang, like what do you want to take away? What's the most dangerous element in the offense? And I think to kind of piggyback off Joe's point, in addition to that kind of being the underlying thought, it's also like they do stuff out of similar looks. When I watch this, it feels like all the nice things we say about Sean, Kyle, Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniels, all those kind of Kyle Shanahan West Coast derivatives, it is in this offense, right? We can run a heavy play action. We can run a keeper. We can run the same formation, and we can run a little choice, but we can also run a shot play off of it. And you're like, you just got to trust your rules and be in the right spot, because if you say, oh, I know what this is, they've got something off of it. And you can tell that's how they designed the offense. So it doesn't give it enough gravity. It's a huge lift to negotiate this offense. There are teams at times, like when you watch film, that find ways. Like when you watch Green Bay, they have a couple sequences where it's like a couple 3-and-outs or a 4-down drive, right? And it's like, okay, that's when the Commanders offense really needs to capitalize and go score points or possess the football. But again, the Detroit Lions offense is so potent that wears thin, and all of a sudden they win that game. It was like 37-30 or something like that, putting up over 30 points. So
yeah, Ben Johnson is very, very good at his job. But it is worth saying, this is not Ben Johnson's offense. This is Dan Campbell's offense. He brought it with him from New Orleans, and Sean Payton, it is thus his offense. And there's a great clip that's kind of going, I don't know what the impetus is. I think it might have been featured in one of like Sunday NFL Countdown or one of those types of shows, did a feature on Payton and Bo Nix and how he just overloaded him in training camp, and Bo's head was spinning because the offense is so wordy. But the point I think that I take out of it, of this 38-word play call with a can and a kill and a this and a that, and it's like, how does this dude get this all out before the headset goes off? Like at 15 on the play clock, the headset stops working. Sean Payton's probably still giving 3 more plays, and quarterback can't even hear it when it's Drew Brees back in the day. But part of what you can decipher, even if you don't know what the things are, is there's a lot of variation in this offense. There is the ability to call basically an invented play on the fly, because you can tag X this, Y that, and like you can tag the player, you can tag the route. Like and in that way, because of how they teach it, how it's prepared, how they game plan it, whatever, they can really create problems for a defense. And their ability to get in good looks consistently, to have options at the line of scrimmage where, all right, we're going to go to the line with this, but we're going to can this and we're going to kill that. And you kill the play, and all of a sudden you're in the perfect look. Like, it's nasty, man. And then they have the players that make it come to life. And that means that as a defense, to go back to Joe's phrase, like your discipline of, all right, our rules are going to cover this. These are the things we're willing to give up. These are the things that we're not. Don't go chasing this thing over here. Don't get too greedy. Because if you think you know what it is, to echo exactly what you just said and land in basically the same spot, if you think you know, they probably know that you think you know, and they're going to have the counter ready.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the Sean Payton verbiage, because I've always felt this my entire career that Sean Payton's offense is like a cousin of Kyle's offense. Like they operate on similar principles. They kind of have similar verbiage things, right? Like a lot of people say, oh, it's a very verbose offense. But I do think the ability, that's something that I didn't think about till you mentioned it. Jared Goff's ability to kind of control the offense at the line of scrimmage. And it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough where it's like, hey, we can get into a better run look because of this front. Like we might have 2 runs called because we know Joe Witt Jr. likes to get into an over front, but he also likes to get into an odd front. And so when he's in the odd front, we like this front. And when he's in the even front, the over front, we like this front. So that's something we did with Kyle a ton. And it's great because you're not running into bad looks. And so one of the things we've talked about with the Commanders offense is sometimes when you're calling a zone read, you're running into a bad look just because of numbers, right? And so that's something that they do a really good job on film of mitigating. And I think that that's super important. And again, they have the talent and the ability at every playmaking spot to make it go. And I think that's the thing that's devastating about it, is it's a well-schemed offense, but they have the playmakers. And I think that's something that, again, is just so important to drive home here. It's like, yeah, like they are good on the board. The offense is good when you draw it up. It's like well designed, but you can have the best designed offense in the world and it won't do anything because you don't have the players. They have the players that make every single play come to life. Like we just talked about Jared Goff's ability to check I went through and I watched probably 70 throws from Jared Goff on 3rd down, and I just was like, oh my God, this guy's playing so well. He's playing so confidently.
His hot streaks are like
hot.
He's the best quarterback in football when he's hot. Like I know that sounds crazy, but like I had someone on, it was Zach yesterday. We were talking about this on the crossover show. He's had like multiple first halves this year where he didn't have an incompletion of double-digit throws. Like he will just get on one and just go nuclear.
And it's because of his ability. Like you mentioned his physical gifts at the top of the show. Like, and he's also, you can tell he understands where the ball should go. He gets it. And he is confident he's going to let it rip. Now, he puts the ball in harm's way sometimes when he does that. But like there was a play, I put it on the breakdown for Command Center this week, where it looks like it's single high safety, right? It looks like cover 2. They rotate down, they rotate into cover 3. He looks to the 3 side for a beat. Like this is the route combination I should be using versus cover 2, which is what I thought it was. He identifies cover 3, he resets his feet and rips a seam to Sam Laporta. And I was like, That is big boy football stuff, right? There was a 3rd and 16 that they had. I think it was versus the Bills. They're kind of floundering a little bit. They can't get anything going. He throws a deep dig over dropping like cover 2 players who are deep and drills it to Amon-Ra St. Brown that ends up being an explosive play. So he is absolutely dealing. So they got players. They got a quarterback that can get it done. They can deleverage him with the run game. He can handle stuff at the line of scrimmage. I think we were playing them. When were we playing them? Carson Wentz's first year. Was that right in Detroit? Does that sound right? And I was
maybe. Well, Carson Wentz only had 1 year, but I think it was the Carson Wentz year. Yeah,
the Carson Wentz year, and he's in the red zone and he checks to a man-beating play. Like that's just big time stuff. So again, their offense is sick. They got a lot of cool stuff to do, but the driver's doing a great job, and he drives the offense. So, Dan's always saying, he plays Jayden Daniels plays the quarterback position the way we need him to. I feel like that is so true for Jared Goff there in Detroit.
No doubt. And then you have the weapons, and then you have the O-line and the running game. We'll get to the O-line and the running game in a second. We were going to do that first, but we're already knee deep on the passing game. Dude,
just a lot going on.
Watching facts. Watching Jameson Williams. Oh my God.
He's fast,
it looks like watching film on 1.25 speed. It is stupid how fast he is. And there are guys that are fast, but on tape it doesn't like fly off the screen. It looks like he is in fast motion on the screen. And what that does to create space because of how quickly safeties have to react of like, oh my God, Jameson Williams is running an over route. Got to get there 5 minutes ago. And then all of a sudden they're vacating space. Here comes Amon-Ra St. Brown on a dig. Here comes Sam Laporta up the seam. Like it is one, I do not want to see a lot of man-to-man coverage in this game because trying to run man for man with that dude sounds like a nightmare. Maybe that's a mistake by me, but that just feels like a bad. I don't want to get in a race with Jameson Williams because I'm going to lose. But I also think that like watching St. Brown, Laporta, Williams off each other and the deep shots and the trust, by the way, that Goff has on Williams. If I put this thing out there and there's 2 safeties and he's running towards the middle of them, this dude's going to split them and he's going to win the race. Like St. Brown's the best receiver on that team. But watching the impact Williams has is devastating.
Yeah, he's scary. I mean, he's like Tyreek Hill fast. I remember I remember his draft year. It was the same draft year as Drake London. It was Jahan's draft year, and I remember I had him as my number 2 receiver because of the speed and because of the toughness and the competitiveness that he plays with. Like he'll block, he's competitive after the catch, he'll try to score touchdowns. But again, that speed, like you see, like I remember the first time when I was in Houston, we played Kansas City. And I remember they had, Tyreek Hill. They had all these kind of track star receivers. And I think I've said this on the show before, but I was like, the field has never looked so big to me. They have to defend so much grass. And that's what he brings to the offense. He brings this vertical threat. Like I saw versus Chicago, they ran what I would call like Miami. So it's like a deep high cross, and then it's a post, and it's off play action. Everybody in the league runs it. And they're trying to get the ball to Amon-Ra St. Brown like you're talking about. And it's cover 3 by the defense. There's a deep post player, and Jameson Williams just runs right by him. And Jared Goff has the arm talent to throw that ball over the safety's head to Jameson Williams, who then catches it and just basically walks in for a score. And I can't remember in my career and covering the NFL and when I played, seeing someone hit a post on a post defender. So that dude's 20 yards deep, and you run by him. You kidding me? Like, it's unbelievable what that does. And again, Jared Goff could have easily hit Amon-Ra St. Brown because that guy's deep as hell. So, like, it just creates this vertical separation. Then you get St. Brown, who's excellent underneath, working routes, digs, choices, outs, all those little things. Like, we were talking about this, we're talking about it now. Like, in the Green Bay game, for example, they're getting bogged down a little on first and second down running the football. But what do? They just turn Amon-Ra St. Brown on quick game, and it's like, here's a 5-yard gain. Now we're in 3rd and 2. Let's run the ball again for a first down. And he can just do that. You have Sam Laporta, who's excellent. Gibbs is excellent. Once that vertical space is established, and then Tim Patrick, we haven't even talked about him, man. He's a great third element to that offense. Yeah. So, yeah. Lots of stuff going on.
And they different personnel. They'll run 11 with Patrick out there. They would love to run 2 tight end stuff. They have the 6 offensive lineman thing, so they can get you in big personnel, and then they'll throw it to literally anybody. Like, it is the trick plays we haven't even talked about, but like they're going to try one. Probably both teams will try one because Cliff, we know, has a pretty deep bag there. So going to be very interesting. And then you get to the part where they will also just hit the ever-loving hell out of you. And up front, they are nasty. in their run game. They will move you. It's not any more difficult than that. Like they do have the athleticism to get on the edge, but like no matter where it is, straightforward, we're running duo, we're running inside zone, we're running tight zone, we're just getting up, we're hitting you and moving you off the spot. Or, hey, we're pulling Penei Sewell and now you have big 58 running at you full speed. Like that is the most devastating offensive line puller in the league since prime Trent Williams. Like it is just a different level of capabilities. And I think you not only see that on the run game, but you see that sometimes on the screen game as well, where they'll run a screen to the right, let Sewell get out there, and he's the only guy in the league that can actually get out there and hit that block, but he can do it every time. And so there's just a devastating nature to their offensive line that we'll see probably most often in the run game. And I think because of the lightness of Washington up front, that becomes a real interesting matchup. And I think it's a shame in a way that we've saved it till this deep in the podcast, because I think this is the thing that a lot of Commanders fans are most worried about.
And they should be. No, I'm just kidding. No, like so this is what I'll say.
Anyone should be against the Lions. They're the best run team in the league.
The backbone of this team is the offensive line. So we just talked about all the playmakers, right? We talked about, this guy's fast and look at, all this stuff. But the pass game works because the offensive line. The run game works because the offensive line. And they are physical, they're fast, they're aggressive, they're confident. The tight ends understand how to block, right? You watch, especially with the addition of Zeitler. Like, I don't know if he's healthy. I know he was on the injury report earlier this week. Might have been a rest day, I don't know. But him and Penei Sewell working together on a 3 technique is a scary proposition. They just blow people off the ball, and they're both athletic enough to get to the spot. And then you add Frank Ragnow to that. Like, he is playing really good football. Taylor Decker, great job. And again, the offense that they're calling insulates them too, right? Because a lot of their drop back pass stuff is on first down. It's with a play action. It's off a keeper. So it just allows them to be so confident, so aggressive, and so physical that, like, they make the pass go, they make the run go, and it's not as efficient as I think as everyone's got in their mind. They're committed to it now. They possess the football offensively, and we always talk about this on the show. They get a lot of bites at the apple to run the ball, and eventually Dave Montgomery's going to break 4 tackles for a 20-yard gain, or Jahmyr Gibbs is going to break one out for 60, right? Because they are committed to it, right? I just talked about how in the Green Bay game, they had a hard time in the first half consistently running the ball, but they possess the ball enough where it's like, hey, we're 20 plays in, and then obviously, Montgomery hits a duo, breaks a tackle, and it's a 20-yard gain. You're like, damn, like we were so good on those other 5 runs that they ran earlier, and now the run average is exactly where it's supposed to be. It's 5 yards a carry for them. So I think that's something that the running thing is scary. It's the consistency of the offense in general that is the most scary thing. Because again, when you play a running team, you get them off rhythm, you get them off schedule, they can't overcome it. This team can for sure overcome it, and they overcome it consistently, and they overcome it well. And then you pile on top of that the fact that they're going to go for it on 4th down. Like, they're going to go for it. If they're plus 50, they're going for it. And it allows them to hold the football for such a long time. Like, when you look at the Green Bay game, 80 offensive snaps for Detroit, 50 for Green Bay. Like, they're just not going to let you play. If that's the game flow and the Commanders can't stop them, and the Commanders go 3 and out at some point offensively, it could be a very long day very, very quickly. And that's again, because of how skilled this offense is and because of how diverse the defense is, you're walking this razor's edge in terms of what has to happen for the Commanders to win.
Totally. And I've used this analogy this week. Like, the NBA draft lottery, the way it works is there's 1,000 ping pong ball combinations. And of those, if we're saying this is a lottery with 1,000 combinations, there's a lot more of those combinations than I would like to admit that come up with the Commanders losing in a major blowout type of fashion. Yeah. Just because there's so many different game scripts where it gets out of hand for Washington, because that's how good Detroit is. Now, there's a couple that also go Washington's way in a big way, which would be really the one game script that Washington wins comfortably is Jared Goff has a day where he turns the ball over 3 or 4 times. Right. And like one of them is a pick 6 and on down the list. Like, you have one of those, a special teams touchdown, like, sure, Washington could win in a blowout. There's a lot of in the middle where either team wins a close game, and that's where I think ultimately it probably comes out. But there is, of those 4 possible outcomes, there's like a 25 or maybe even higher chance that Washington gets blown out because of exactly what you're talking about. I would say the one like firewall on that is The idea that Jayden Daniels has to drop back 50 times doesn't necessarily scare me.
No.
And I think for a lot of teams in the league, part of the reason that blowouts can get out of control is because if all of a sudden you have to abandon the run game and rely on your quarterback, there's not enough guys that can do that. Jayden is one of them. And Fortier and I talked about this on the radio on Wednesday, if people want to check that out in the Hoffman Show feed here in a couple minutes, because I promise an hour in, we're almost done. But if folks want to go check that out, Sam talked about, like, that's a game script that, 50 dropbacks where he's got 40 attempts and 10 rushes. Like, that's not exactly a terrible plan for Cliff Kingsbury and Jayden Daniels on offense. So I do think that is a good firewall that if there are a couple of drives early, that Detroit is able to do whatever they want. And Washington does have a 3-and-out. And all of a sudden it's 14-0 at the start of the second quarter. Washington's not out of it in the way that other teams would be out of it, because you can trust Jayden to put together a drive or two. And if you can just get one stop, one turnover, and that's going to be the other big thing here, is can you take advantage when Goff gives you opportunities, or can you punch the ball out? This is going to be a super physical game. Can you get a turnover? Can you fall on it? Like, these are the questions that are going to decide winning and losing for Washington in an even more heightened way than they always decide winning or losing for Washington.
No, I mean that's the narrative. That's what it's got to be. I think the way they played Tampa Bay is exactly how they have to play the Detroit Lions. And this is going to be a little bit different because I think Tampa Bay's defense is probably better. They're better at stopping the run. They're a little bit faster, right? Not that Detroit's a bad defense, like we said before, but they just have more weapons defensively. So, I think they'll be able to run the ball a little bit more effectively. I think there'll be some other things they can get to, right? But the second they get a 3-and-out on Detroit, you got to go score. You got to hold the ball for a long time, and you got to go score. Like, there's no compromise there. It's like you got to go for it on fourth down. You got to make it happen, because if you go back and punt, they're for sure going to score. Like, they possess the football. They score touchdowns. They can run the ball. Like, it's just a sleeping giant. And when you look at games where they've had a hard time, Detroit, the offense has possessed the football. They've been hyper aggressive, and they've scored touchdowns instead of field goals. Like, this is a game where it's like, throw all your traditional view of like field goals, take the points. No, we got to score touchdowns. And the second that they turn the ball over or they go 3-and-out, we have, as an offense, have to capitalize because you're only going to get a couple. And that's the thing that's going to cause the difference in the swing of the game. And the other thing about this game that's going to be crazy too, potentially, is you might only get 8 possessions. Like, It's going to be a tight game.
Because both teams are trying to play like that.
Every possession is going to be incredibly critical. And so the second you get a turnover, let's go get that done, because that could be the moment that wins the game for you.
And let's see about the kicking game. Obviously, Zane just had that big kick, but their kicker's very, very good. Bates has hit a bunch of big ones this year. If, God forbid, there is a punt in this game, like, how does that go on a coverage standpoint? And can you pin the opposition deep? Special teams, can you get a return? Jamison Crowder getting healthier by the week here. He was upgraded to a full participant in practice yesterday. And the other thing I do wonder on special teams real quick on the way out here, Logan, Eckler gets named second team All-Pro as a kick returner. Luke's still returning kicks. I wonder if they go back to Austin this week, or if Austin is like, hey, I kind of got some PTSD from how I got concussed, which is a very real thing, by the way. I'm not saying that flippantly. Like, he might be like, hey, look, I don't, and I'm not saying like I know that he has this. I'm saying that the idea that could be the thing is something that is very real and a possibility psychologically. So do they just stick with Luke, who's done a really good job, and say Austin's too important to our offense? But that is another weapon that could potentially make its way back. Say, hey, if there's going to be more kick returns in this game because Detroit's offense is awesome, do we put Austin Eckler back there and see if we can pop one of our own? Because he is, while Luke has been good, Austin's better at it, which is why he was named second team All-Pro. Anything else, or is an hour 4 minutes good for podcasting for one day? Man,
I'm excited. I'm a little scared, but I'm excited. I think it's going to be a really cool game, and I think the one thing about this that we haven't talked about is just the the emotional confidence of the team.
Yes.
Like, they believe in themselves, and there's something really special about that. And so on paper, we just lined up all the reasons why Detroit. The ping pong ball analogy. I love that. There's a lot of universes where they win, right? But the belief, the confidence, the brotherhood, the playmaking ability of Jayden Daniels, like, I've never really felt this way as a Commanders analyst or player, where it's like, shoot, we got a shot. Even though this deck is stacked crazy, like, we got a shot. And I think that's a pretty cool thing, and I can't wait to see it. Like, how they rise to this moment against what I think is maybe the best team in the NFL. So that's something that I'm really curious about in watching this.
I am too, and in part because I think the same thing is true on the other side. Like,
yes.
I think that the team that probably has that the most outside of Washington in the entire league is Detroit.
Yeah.
And so they were, in many ways, is to bring this full circle, like, they are the model for what Washington is trying to do from kind of a culture standpoint. And so they also believe this is their time. They believe that, like, this is who we are. They have a strong identity. And I think in many ways, like, this is a test of Washington to be like, you're going to look yourself in the mirror here. And obviously there's a ton of talent differences in terms of where the talent is dispersed. Washington has the better quarterback in the game. That gives me confidence on the Washington side. Seems like a relevant plot point in a playoff game. Who's got the better quarterback? But you're not going to be able to just, like, out physical this team. You're not going to be able to out believe the Detroit Lions. So when those two things, those meters of belief are at 10 and they collide at 8:15 on Saturday night, what happens? That's what makes the sport fun. That's what makes being this deep into the playoffs fun. And I can't wait. I'm very jealous of you, frankly, for getting to be there on the sideline for it. And it's going to be an electric atmosphere. Can't wait to talk about it with you next week, no matter how it goes down. And after it goes down, Kevin Sheehan and I will be right back here. We will be in your feeds ASAP by the time you wake up on Sunday morning, and we'll be live, instant reaction show style, post-game on Saturday night. Appreciate Sheehan joining me, and I'm going to keep saying that, even though I haven't actually confirmed that he's doing it, but he agreed to it last week. So, Kevin, if you bail, the whole world knows now. For Logan Paulson, I'm Craig Hoffman. See you Saturday night. This is Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.